We'll begin with 105, appeal of the board-level decision regarding challenge material. Superintendent Ayers will highlight this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Board members, the board received a letter dated May 15th, 2025 from the Attorney General Uthmeyer with legal guidance that required removal of certain materials and to undertake an immediate review of our current collection. In accordance with the guidance from the Florida Department of Education and the Florida Attorney General, it is my recommendation that blankets by Greg Thompson, identical by Ellen Hopkins, be made unavailable in HCPS media centers.
Yeah, and Board and Madam Chair, if I may provide some further context as you consider this item. This board will recall that pursuant to state law, the board established a process to allow people who had objections to specific material to challenge those. As part of that process, there is a school level review at the first level that may be appealed to a district level committee and then finally to the board. So there are 3 levels of review for challenged materials in Hillsborough County. That complies with Florida statutes, and the board did its statutory duty by not only creating the process but considering the books that have been challenged. As part of the challenge process, this board has voted to keep some books on the shelf and to remove some. These 2 particular books, by a vote of 5-2, after reviewing the record and considering both the district committee and the school committee, you voted to keep those books on the shelf. As the superintendent said, there's been guidance from the state that he is now bringing a recommendation to you to remove those books. He does not have the power to remove those books on his own because there was a board vote keeping them on the shelf. So that's the context of how the board finds itself here tonight, and you are legally required to react to his recommendation. He's giving you a recommendation, and that's your job as board members to consider that. If you are in favor of his recommendation, you would vote yes, and if you are against his recommendation, you would vote no. And you will need a motion and a second to begin debate.
Thank you. I need a motion and a second to approve C-105. I have a motion by Member Rendon and a second by Member Combs. Member Combs, Member Rendon and I pulled this item. Member Combs, do you have a question or comment?
Yes. Thank you, Chair Vaughn. 5 years ago, I had the honor of being elected as a school board member. If you know me, you know that I'm not motivated by politics. I'm motivated by students and the belief in providing all students a quality education. That means meeting their needs academically, social, and emotional. The chaos and activism on both sides makes me wonder, if we spent more time focusing on funding and helping our students achieve academic success, wouldn't we live in a better community? One of the reasons we're losing students is because of this narrative that students are not protected in our schools. As a former educator and a mother whose children recently graduated from Hillsborough County Public Schools, I can say with confidence that what they learned was grounded in facts, critical thinking, and not indoctrination. Superintendent Ayers, the way you've handled this entire situation has increased the confusion and impacted this district in a negative manner. From the beginning, I have said that I do not want or approve of inappropriate materials in our schools. The Department of Education has made it crystal clear they do not want these 2 books in our schools. I strongly encourage everyone to focus on literacy and the needs of our students. That is why I'm in favor of removing these 2 books and bringing our attention back to the classrooms. And that is the most important thing, is focusing on our students and the needs of our students and stop this cultural warfare that's only weakening our district. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Combs. Member Rendon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On June 29th, 2023, long before this book challenge was ever put into place for blankets and identical, I submitted a list of 200 books to the superintendent of Hillsborough County Schools, asking for them to be reviewed and removed from our public libraries. I believe these books contain sexually explicit material that was not fit for age and appropriateness for our students in our schools. At that time, it was ignored. I also came back later during the April 2024 in review of these 2 books. I continue to stand on the principles that these two books are age and developmentally inappropriate for any of the students in Hillsborough County schools. The content in both of these books are highly explicit. They border on pornography. If they were put into a motion picture, they would be banned for any student under the age of 17 to even be watching them. I personally read both of those books and on several occasions had to put it down because the sexual explicit nature was beyond even my content that I would even ever want to read on a personal level. There is no literary value to a single child under the age of 18 and therefore should never be in our libraries. There is a difference in which we have got to take a personal responsibility to anything that we put inside our schools, to making sure that students do not have access to inappropriate age and developmental content. That is our responsibility, not to use taxpayer dollars for that. And because of that, my opinion has never wavered and has never changed since I have been elected into this office. And I will constantly make sure a child is safe. If this issue is about suicide or other issues, those children need to get serious, considerable help from our psychologists, our social workers, and our guidance counselors. They should never sit alone and read this material. This material is not at all about banning books. This is about sexualizing a generation that should never be exposed to this content. And I will not apologize for keeping it out of the hands of children. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Rendon. Member Gray?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank those speakers who showed the courage and the passion of how they feel about what our children read. Glad they are reading. And I appreciate the remarks and the consideration of the political vice that each of us are now experiencing. And most of you recognize that this vote does not necessarily reflect my professional nor educational background. I'm a former civics teacher most of my life in American history, political science major, and I do openly express the regretful situation that I find myself in as an individual school board member. I do not believe in censorship, but as Member Combs eloquently said, I do believe in literacy and reading and getting back to the business of education. I will support the superintendent's recommendation, or should I say,
That's correct.
is that correct? Okay. But I wanted to make those remarks accordingly. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member Gray. Dr. Hahn?
Thank you, Member Vaughn. I appreciate all my board members' comments, and I respect their perspective. Since day one, I've championed literacy in this district, and I really, like Member Combs said, I wish we were talking more about the academic priorities of this district, but unfortunately, we're here. A year ago, I voted to have these two books removed. I haven't changed my position on that at all. But my position, as somebody who really values books and children's exposure to books and stories to gain experiences and learn new things, I certainly want children to see themselves in books. I want them to read about maybe difficult topics that they're unsure about or trying to navigate. And those books exist in our libraries. What I can't support is the sexually graphic material that exists throughout these two books, not just in a paragraph or two. For me, it's more about the belief that schools should not be distributing sexually explicit material, period, no matter what the topics are. There are, like I said, there's plenty of books out there for students to read and children to read that can expand their imagination or answer their questions that aren't so graphic sexually. And I think that we need to really look at the process on how we're onboarding books in our schools and make sure that the books that we're bringing into our schools can address the needs and the interests of our students without exposing them to sexually explicit material to this degree. This isn't about, a boy and a girl kissing, on a date. This is graphic, sometimes violent sexual content. And, I don't want to censor or ban things, but this really isn't about that. That's an argument made outside of a schoolhouse in a society. We're talking about schools. We're talking about minors. And I am personally not comfortable distributing sexually graphic material to minors. That's where I come from with my decision. And I want to thank the superintendent for bringing this forward and allowing us to have this discussion today. I do agree. I think that you handled this well, and I'm glad that we were able to bring it back to the board for a vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Hahn. Member Washington?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have a lot to do in schools. I was just reading today on CNN News how we are behind in our studies in the United States of America. There are a lot of books on the shelf that probably shouldn't be there. We should be concentrating on academics, because Hillsborough County needs academics, and we've been doing a hell of a job with academics, and we're going to continue doing a great job with academics. I just believe there are certain things that should not be on the shelf for kids. I'm an old man. I've been around a long time. And I understand many times how books get on the shelf. I think everybody tried to do their very best in this. We all wanted to be fair to people. But you can't always win, because there's always something against you any way you go in life, people. It's difficult times. It's difficult things that you won't be able to do and we won't be able to say. And Superintendent, you have been working hard. We have been working hard as a board. The cabinet has been working hard as a board. And we want to do what we think is best. And what we think is best may not be what you think is best. That's why I don't believe in common sense. Because common sense for Joe may not be common sense for Shea Washington. So I am going to uphold and be with the superintendent on this, because he is the superintendent of the school. And we got to work hard. We got to continue to work hard and do the things that we think is right for Hillsborough County Public Schools. And speakers, every speaker had their own point tonight, this afternoon. And I thought it was great, because you should be able to voice your opinion. But at this point of the game, I'm going to be with the superintendent to remove the books off the shelf. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member Washington. Member Perez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Superintendent, first I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your representation. When you went to stand before the board. I know you didn't get a lot of kudos, but you did go and represent. And I know that was a hard thing to do. So I just want to acknowledge you for that. I also want to acknowledge the speakers that came tonight, because everybody made their point, everybody said their piece, and I want to thank you for that as well. But yes, we have to stand and remove this noise from this space, because we have to focus on our students going forward, especially here in the 7th largest district in this nation. Coming back to support our students, being able to lift them and what they need in their education, and like it says, preparing them for life going forward. So hopefully some of these speakers will come back and talk about the certificates of completion. Hopefully they'll come back and talk about funding. Hopefully they'll come back and talk about what the classrooms need and more supports for our teachers. And they'll give the same energy to that as well. So I'm also going to support you in your recommendation as well tonight. But also support everything else that you bring forward. And hopefully these parents here will also support you when you need what you need for your classrooms and these schools and here in Hillsborough County. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Perez. All right, I have some questions for you, Mr. Porter. Is it true that the Penguin Random House case against the Florida Department of Education declaring the statute that's been referenced by the Attorney General prevailed, and that the decision declaring the statute unconstitutional applies here in Hillsborough County?
Madam Chair, so board members, the chair is referencing a case that recently, last month, came out of the Middle District of Florida. That's a federal court. And it was Penguin Random House versus Gibson. It's a significant case. The court and the publishers in that case sued both the State Department of Education and the local school boards of Orange County and Volusia regarding House Bill 1069, which amended Florida Statutes 1006-28. The court found certain sections of that statute, not the whole statute, unconstitutional as being overbroad. That's, again, certainly a significant case. The state has indicated it will appeal. The appeal process would go to the 11th Circuit and then ultimately to the United States Supreme Court. So it's in flux. It's certainly an important case and one that we need to consider. And if we were ever challenged in a court of law, we would cite that case as precedent. For purposes of today's hearing or agenda item, the superintendent is basing his recommendation on guidance from the state, specifically the state attorney general, who's the state's chief legal officer. Superintendent was aware of this case when he made his recommendation. And again, the letter from the attorney general references not only the statute that is in question, but also the obscenity statute. So there are other statutes involved in his guidance. What you're reacting to now is the superintendent's recommendation based on guidance from the state. So while the case is important and should be considered, you're reacting to the superintendent's recommendation.
Okay, so I just want to clarify, a federal court found it unconstitutional, and yet this letter from the Attorney General is threatening legal action against us if we don't abide by it.
I want to be very clear on the record. The court found certain sections of the statute unconstitutional, not the entire statute. That's very important.
Okay. Thank you for that information. So, fellow board members, I move that we table this motion until we receive clear guidance from the state explaining how these specific books are alleged to violate Florida statutes and what legal authority supports their removal. This motion is not about avoiding a decision. It's about ensuring that any action we take is legally sound, constitutionally defensible, and based on consistent, enforceable standards. And at this time, I believe that clarity is missing, and here's why. 1, lack of clear legal guidance. The district has not received a clear explanation of how these particular books violate law while others do not. We have no transparency in how this list of 55 books was compiled, and no consistent framework to reevaluate them. This lack of clarity makes it impossible to apply the law fairly and consistently. Uncertain authority of the superintendent. It remains unclear whether the superintendent has the legal authority to unilaterally remove books from school libraries. Acting without legal clarity risks overstepping boundaries and undermining board governance and exposing the district to legal challenges. Parental rights and community perspectives are unclear and divided. There's no clear legal or policy guidance on how to respect the diverse views of parents regarding school library content. Without a structured process, any removal risks alienating portions of the community and eroding trust in the decision-making policy. Pornography. It's not legally defined in the Florida education policy. The Florida Department of Education training materials do not offer a legal definition of pornography. Instead, they reference a broad dictionary definition that are highly subjective, using an ambiguous standard, and that opens the door to First Amendment violations and inconsistent enforcement of the law. The federal court ruling on August 13th, 2025, a U.S. District Judge, Carlos Mendoza, ruled a part of HB 1069 unconstitutional due to vagueness. The ruling emphasized the statute does not clearly define what materials is prohibited, leaving districts without reliable legal guidance and vulnerable to litigation. Legislation attempts to clarify the law have failed. Efforts like House Bill 1539 attempted to provide clearer legal standards, but failed due to serious constitutional concerns. This failure highlights that even lawmakers have not resolved the legal uncertainty we're being asked to navigate. And finally, these books have already been reviewed and retained. These two books were previously reviewed by this board under established policy with public input and were retained through a transparent vote. Reversing that decision now without legal clarification undermines both the process and the public's trust in it. This motion does not shut down the conversation. It simply calls for caution, patience, and the respect for the rule of law. Until we receive clear, enforceable, and constitutionally sound direction from the Commissioner of Education and the Attorney General, I believe we should not move forward. Excuse me, I'm speaking, please, and I'm asking for order. I didn't interrupt you anytime that you were speaking. Acting prematurely with conflicting legal opinions, vague standards, and unclear authority risks violating student rights, eroding public trust, and compromising our responsibilities as elected officials. Let's wait for the legal clarity we need to act responsibly in accordance with our constitutional and statutory duties. Thank you.
Okay, board members, the chair's made a motion, and that means to continue. That takes precedence. So before you can continue the discussion about the continuance, it would need a second. So there needs to be a second or the motion dies. And the motion is to continue this to get further guidance from the state.
I see no second.
Okay, so there appears to be no second. That means the motion dies, and you're back to the discussion of the main motion, which is the superintendent's recommendation.
Okay, I have comments on that, but I'll get back in the queue. Member Rendon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to make it very clear that the matters that we have in front of us not only are regarding Statute 1069, in which the judgment was on, but it also reflects Statute 1003.46, Statute 847.012, both reflecting and describing inappropriate sexual explicit content and pornographic materials. Therefore, we're not just talking about that. We're talking about inappropriate materials that are put in front of students. In section 1006.28, specifically in section 2B5, any inappropriate for grade level or age group in which the material is used. That is not under question or ambiguous within that ruling. Also, I want to make sure that this is clear that when we received the Attorney General's request to this board, it was not regarding these two books. It was actually regarding the way in which we processed the review of the material that was objected to in other districts. We did not have proof that we had done that procedure properly or at all. That's what we are doing. The superintendent is bringing to this board materials that he believes are inappropriate for our school libraries based upon age and developmental appropriateness for our children. And so I think that alone should make us consider this to be appropriate to remove these books. I would also consider that we review the process in which we are reviewing books, because somehow these books are getting in without proper review or reading by content or because in which this content and any of these laws are, we represent the community. At no point in time when any books or materials are coming into our libraries are community members even being addressed about their approval of those books coming in. We do not have a process that invites anyone from the community to have any part in that at all. Also, let's make understand that this process of one objection took 8 months, which is highly inappropriate. There should never be a time where it would take that long for books to be reviewed. Second of all, I have taken now back to our district level an additional books that were submitted for objection in June of 2024, which we had no record of receiving. I have subsequently brought that to the district for them to begin that process, because although I have receipt of that it was submitted through the proper channels, we have never reviewed that process. So therefore, as the Attorney General said, our process is flawed. And this is one way that we are starting in that process of bringing things right to this district and moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Rendon. I do want to point out that I appreciate you referencing those statutes, but nothing has changed statutorily since we had these discussions and followed our process about the review process from 2 years ago. Those statutes were in play. So if there was something that we had done to violate the law, there were 2 years where the Attorney General or the state legislation or the governor had to address that. However, I was hoping to table the motion, but since it's failed to pass, I do have comments on the main motion. I want to begin by clearly stating my position on the motion to remove these 2 books from our school libraries. This issue strikes at the core of parental rights, constitutional freedoms, and our responsibilities as an elected official. If I vote to remove these books, it's not because I believe it's right, but because I'm under duress and facing explicit threats of legal actions, including possible arrest or removal from office. I insist that this coercion be officially recorded in the minutes of this meeting. It's essential that the public and any reviewing authority understand the true context behind this vote. In May, Attorney General James Upmeyer issued a directive stating, and I quote, "The materials listed above should immediately be removed, and I'll monitor your actions to determine whether formal legal action by my office is warranted." While I respect the Attorney General's office, these threats are not grounded in sound legal precedent. Forcing elected officials to act against both established legal interpretations and the will of the public is unconstitutional. It undermines the principle of democratic governance. This kind of coercion is an abuse of power. It reflects authoritarian tactics that threaten the freedoms that were sworn to upheld regardless of political affiliation. Despite this, if I were to vote in favor of removing these 2 books today, it's solely due to the legal pressure being applied. I've spoken with many voters, and they've urged me to vote in a way that allows me to remain in office, so I can continue representing their voices and values. They understand the threats we're facing and the legal process that we're facing, and have made it clear that they will find other ways to fight this battle. In our prior vote to retain these books, we followed the law and honored the findings of both a local review committee and a district-wide panel. These committees recognized the educational value of the materials and affirmed the importance of literacy, inclusion, and student access. We simply upheld a thoughtful, transparent, and legal process that reflected the values of our community. To those who came and spoke out today, I hear you. Your frustration is justified, but let's aim our outrage where it truly belongs. At the State Board of Education, which falsely accused our dedicated media specialists of being child abusers. At the Attorney General, who's issued threats without solid legal basis. And at the broader failure to provide clear, consistent, and transparent guidance around the law. Our educators deserve our respect, not baseless attacks, fear, or confusion created by shifting political demands. Regardless of where anyone stands on these specific books, we must agree on this. Transparency, due process, and the respect for the law matter. Abandoning those principles damages public trust in education and weakens the democratic systems we all rely on. Finally, let's be honest. These ongoing political attacks on books and classrooms are hurting our students. When culture wars divide our community and pit parents against parent, no one wins. Only our children lose. This fight goes beyond a single school board vote. It's about protecting the rights of all students, parents, and educators, and elected officials from overreach and intimidation at the state level. Thank you. Now, seeing that there are no questions or comments, further questions or comments, please vote when your lights appear. Do you want to give clarification on what the vote is?
Board members, the superintendent has recommended that the 2 books that he described earlier be removed based on guidance from the state. So if you're in favor of removing the books, vote yes. If you're in favor of keeping the books, vote no.
And the motion passes unanimously. At this time, we're going to take a 5-minute recess to allow those who want to leave an opportunity to do so.